Welcome to Risk Roundup. Since energy drives economic growth, the power grid has always had a profound impact on nations' economic survival, security, and sustainability. Now supported by advances in many technologies, as the Internet of Things transforms the way nations manage energy through smart grids and smart meters, energy industry is now able to automate most energy management processes. As a result, nations are now able to lay the foundation of an integrated energy market which can work for everyone, consumers and as well as suppliers, and has diverse energy sources, and which ensures that energy supply can meet demand and bring sustainability to nations' economic engine. So, as nations learn how to use energy more efficiently and try to put renewables and smart technology at the heart of their energy system for its security, the emerging revolution and evolution of power grid will likely have a profound impact on each nation's economy, survival, security, and sustainability. Smart grids are on its way to allowing energy to keep flowing where and when it's needed and is able to make the best use of all renewable energy sources. So, as nations witness transformative changes to the way electricity is produced, transmitted, and used, it is important to understand and evaluate what are the current and future trends in technology that are transforming the grid and what will be the future of global energy system. To discuss nation's journey from traditional grid towards future grid and the smart grid to smart energy further, I'm delighted to welcome Ravi Seethapathy to Risk Roundup. Ravi is the executive chairman of Biosirus. He's an expert advisor on smart grid, smart cities, and energy systems. He's a globally recognized speaker and a corporate director. He's an invited speaker internationally and has co authored over 50 technical papers in the areas of smart grid. He has also received numerous honors and citations, including Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal, Fellow Canadian Academy of Engineering, Hydro and President's Award, Honor Roll of the Shastri Institute, Honorary Fellow, Centennial College, Indo-Canada Chamber of Commerce, and so much more. So he's based in Canada. Welcome, Ravi. We are honored to have you on Risk Roundup.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, and pleasure to be a part of this program.
Wonderful, Ravi. So, as technology transforms everything, how would you describe today's electric power grid across nations?
I think, as in other verticals, if you take the financial side vertical, you take the transportation vertical, they've all undergone phenomenal changes and are continuing to do so. The last leg, perhaps, is the power vertical, or what we call the energy vertical. It's been a little late coming to the game. But now, thanks to the evolving technologies, the ability for these technologies to come together, stitch together, it is now implementable. And therefore, the power grid should now think of how it will change its architecture to enable all these things that are already at our doorstep. And it's happening, perhaps a little slow, but it's happening.
Yes, very true. It is a little slow, but I mean, think of it, it's the largest machine on earth, right? The people say that electric grid is the largest machine on earth. So bringing a change to this largest machine is not that easy. It has so many variables. So as we evaluate many of these variables, from cost to physical wear and tear and technical obsolescence, or safety, security, sustainability, and meeting the power needs of respective nations' citizens, what do you think is threatening the reliability of the current form of power grid the most? Is it the technology?
No, I think there are two things. One, what is really threatening is the architecture, the legacy architecture that was put in place 100 years ago. It's like the rail tracks versus surface road transport. Road transport is more manual. You can change the vehicle. A rail track is a rail track is a rail track. It hasn't undergone much changes. So in a way, the grid, for economical reasons and for power delivery, laid its railroad tracks up to the door of the customer. And now the same legacy system has got to be rethought to say, okay, how do I convert a rail track into a road that allows multiple vehicles to ply on that as opposed to a single vehicle? So it's sort of an analogy, if you will. So the question really that threatens us, I think, is one, the legacy system. The second is the regulatory system that actually is slower to understand. It's a statute of law. The law says lowest cost power, and therefore that has to undergo some changes. Climate change clearly in the last 7 years has told us how things that we never expected is now coming 4 or 5 times a year sometimes. And in North America, Europe, everywhere, Asia, we've seen this. So the question is, how will this new architecture change itself using the technologies that already are at our doorstep to be able to enable the new architecture, which is a two-way power flow as opposed to a single-way power flow?
That's very true, and that's an excellent point that you made. That now, and since commercial electric power grids have become increasingly fragile and vulnerable to extended disruptions, as we see across nations, what technological, non-technological improvements in grid infrastructure do you think is absolutely essential across nations?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the legacy system allows for no breakage. If you break the wire, you lose power. And it is not intelligent enough to break at points and to rejoin itself, much like fracture mechanics. So we need to re-architect the grid such that it breaks itself into pieces when needed, islands itself and continues to work, whether that be a condominium, whether that be a neighborhood, whether that be a city, and then rejoins again when everything is back to normal. So resiliency is a new word you would have heard in the last several years. The ability to go down, stay operable, and the ability to come back up again and reconnect with your neighbors is an architecture that unfortunately today is not there in the legacy grid. So we need to provide for that in the legacy grid.
Absolutely. I think that's an excellent point. But how easy it is to move away from the legacy infrastructure and how easy it is to transform the grid that way?
Very difficult, very expensive, very investment oriented, as you just said, the largest asset operator in the world. And therefore, it is difficult to ask the question, what do I leave behind to do new? And as long as you keep using the word, what do I leave behind, it bothers the balance sheets of many, many operators. So the question is exactly like the railroad. When the transport sector on the surface came along, it never ever talked about the balance sheet of the railroads and what it left behind. It still does what it does. And the transport sector today is 85% of our goods and services. In a way, we need to rethink this and say, okay, what is it that we want out of our new legacy systems? What is it are we going to leave behind? And if there is a little bit of a financial hit, we have to say, what do we substitute it with as a new business opportunity, as opposed to crying over spilt milk? Because the crying over spilt milk kind of syndrome is where the difficulty is, because you constantly keep looking back at your balance sheet and saying, oh my God, I lost 50% of my balance sheet. But in Europe today, wires company are losing a lot of their value on the balance sheet because of new technology. So you can come, as they say in North American terms, kicking and screaming to the station, or you can come willingly, one of the two. So that's where we are.
Yes, very true. And across nations, as we see that the ownership of the grid is not always governments owning it or, nations owning that. It's both, public as well as private. So when the private industry owns the grid, many components of the grid across nations, it's difficult to drive change because they always look at the shareholder value and, what will happen to that stock, if they have to show such big expenses. So it's very complex because of the nature of the ownership across nations. Now, as technology drives change in the power industry, and it is driving each component of the industry, what are the current and future trends in technology that you see will fundamentally transform the grid? Not only what we are seeing today, but in the coming tomorrow, the emerging technologies, which ones do you think that will fundamentally transform the grid?
I think fundamentally three things have already happened and two more things are happening. One is the cost of sensors have come down dramatically. Telecommunication costs have come down so dramatically. It's fallen by 10 orders of magnitude in the last 15 years with all the telecommunications that we have. And the third is the processing power of PCs is increased by another 10 orders of magnitude. So all the three put together, we have devices today that can actually allow you to do things in a very different way, as fast, if not faster. The question is, how do you architect it? Number one. The second thing that's happening is customer choice. Like in the financial vertical, we saw that what's changed in the financial vertical due to customer choice. In the transportation and other sectors, in the fast-moving goods, we are seeing customer choice. So that customer choice is now coming about in the power sector. How? is coming by way of rooftop solar. That's actually falling in price. We've got smart inverters that actually are also falling in price. And we have energy storage that at the moment is a little more expensive, but it's falling in price. So somebody's got to put these 3, 4 things together and say, I don't need the grid for, let's say, 80% of my time. You, the grid, I need you to price it for 20% of the time. And the grid should be able to have an answer as opposed to saying, I've got a fixed cost and then therefore I will levy you anyway. So it's a question of a paradigm shift as to what used to be should not be what it should be going forward.
Yes, very true. And I also see two other, variables playing here. One is the democratization of information that we see because of the internet, all the knowledge is out there. And then the do-it-yourself movement. We don't see at this point that the grid or developing, or producing electricity is entitled for only, large players. Even small players, individuals are also emerging who are trying to, bring innovations in this sector. So these two movements, I think, are also fundamentally playing a bigger role in how the transformation happens. So how do you think are all these ongoing technological, non-technological changes that we see across nations for the power grid affecting the business operations, distributions, and supply model of the power grid's participants, including all, the energy producers as well as the users?
I think 3 things. So if you look at, we also enable companies for technology development, and we are bringing in as many utility-oriented tools right into a box that comes into a house. So if you take the smart inverter today, it can be enhanced to do a lot of things that the utility would like you to do, which you couldn't do 5 years ago. So we are now telling the utility that, by putting this inside the house, not only will I have choices, energy storage, rooftop PV, etc., but I could also sell my services to you when you need me to do certain things. And that the utility at the moment has not sort of caught on yet, because part of the regulation says you will not allow free, sort of free fall control in the network wires. It's a big architectural change for allowing everybody to take charge. And that has not come about in the regulatory stream. The utility would like to keep all that under its own control. So it's now providing what's called a star architecture, where through its SCADA systems, it comes to your house, tells you what to do. You either agree, not agree, and you go back. But the true retail system is where you will do things autonomously, and the grid doesn't have to be in the bedroom, so to speak, wanting to know everything that you did behind the meter. And I think that is a big paradigm shift of giving up control. But the technology for giving up, enabling that exists today. It exists right today, in fact. I can do VAR support for voltage control. I can do my own frequency balancing, all that through boxes that just sit inside my garage.
So do you see that trend all across nations or only in few nations?
It comes across largely first in the developed world because of price premiums. So California, you see it. But the technology developers, by the way, are not in the North American stream. They all come from East Asia. And so it is made in East Asia for the North American or the West European market. And as the prices begin to fall, it then gets adopted in other parts of the world as well. So it's a very different play between who thinks of it and who uses it. It's surprising that East Asia has got such, or Asia Pacific, has got such a large play in that domain knowledge of what needs to be done.
Yes, very true, very true. Now, each nation's power grid is at a critical juncture. I mean, all the nations are trying to figure out their, what next step they should be taking, as it faces so many risks, but it also has so many opportunities to improve efficiency and reduce environmental impact and enhance security and resilience because of all these amazing, fundamental transformative changes that are coming because of the technology transformation. So, how are nations determining appropriate balance between all these competing interests to enable not only digitization but also decentralization and modernization of this electric power system?
2 parts. The emerging markets are actually have a much better sort of blank canvas to play with. They don't have the legacy systems. They don't need to bolt it on to the old systems and make it work. They don't have all the history behind it. So in my view, the developing world, which did not have that much of reliability in electric power supply, can actually do things a little faster. much like the wireless that came on and took that part of the world. The second is it's a tough slug to say that a nation must have a roadmap, and the roadmap is uniformly across its own nation. So typically what happens is you have a very high architectural roadmap for the country. It then breaks down into regions, and from regions to utilities, and each utility tends to have its roadmap. And that roadmap can be slightly different, sometimes maybe even disconnected from the larger roadmap. But the bigger question is we, for example, in the SAARC countries are doing a smart grid roadmap for all the 7 members of the SAARC nation: India, Bhutan, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Mauritius. And each one is different. So you take the strengths of each of the cylinders that it's firing on, and then you say, what do I do to make things happen? And therefore, when I look at the smart grid roadmap, they're all different. Different pieces of cloth, stitched differently, different colors, and therefore it's now looking like a mosaic as opposed to one. Now, that exactly is what happened in North America. Even within the states, within the United States, the provinces within Canada, each one has got a different smart grid roadmap. And within each of the state and the provinces, each utility has got its own wish list, which is slightly different. Like California is different from Arizona. Florida has got a different take on it. Say, the Carolinas have got a different take on it. And so they all have different aspects based on what generation they produce. The Ohio coal belt will never give up Ohio. It's got, a lot of coal in it. So it will be fossil based to some extent. So the key question is you must allow for that variance while you still try to overarchingly balance what the national needs are. And I think it's a tough one. It's a very tough one.
It is tough. You are absolutely right about that. Now, earlier you mentioned two-way communication. So it seems that these digital technologies, it now allows the two-way communication, as you mentioned before, between the utility and its customers, and the it also allows the sensing of the transmission lines in what makes perhaps the grid smart. So is that what is making the grid smart, or there is more to the smartness of the grid? And where do you see more technological advances that needs to be in place to make the grid do the things that it needs to do to be effectively very smart and takes the power grid to its next level?
Largely, the innovation is being driven in what I call the medium voltage and low voltage, the distribution grid. It essentially was running blind, and that's because it didn't need to be. The grid has always been what I call requisite smart. In other words, it plays to what the technologies are, but nobody did anything for distribution in the last 50, 60 years. So it was in its way. The transmission was always considered to be capital intensive, and therefore it has its requisite smartness. The key, I think, is architecture. So a lot of the stuff that was only viable for transmission today is available in a box top or a tabletop on the distribution. A good example is phasor measurement unit. A phasor measurement unit is so critical and has been used in the transmission system for fast-acting devices in the transmission sector. The PNNL system of the United States, for example, has got phasor measurement units all across North America, including Canada. That today is available in a cube of 4 inches to 4 inches by 4 inches, is available for any distribution person with almost the same spec. And today there are a lot of case studies that say how by using the phasor measurement unit, I can detect something 100 times faster than what I do today. So it's coming. The question is, how do I architect it in what I call as a hierarchical topology? That hierarchical topology is what's holding the distribution back. It needs to be a peer-to-peer topology, in a way like the internet, not quite like the internet, but like the internet, where people can connect and disconnect, and there is no master that tells you I need permission to do so and I need to do this. It should all architect by itself. So that whole notion of peer-to-peer has not come in the electricity sector because the legacy system is still very hierarchical, and therefore that needs to come. Second, on a telecom, we talk of Wi-Fi. Everybody uses Wi-Fi in a big way today. Today, Wi-Fi 6.0, which will be launched in a month from now, is so fast that all the Wi-Fi ones that we did 15 years ago in the electric power system is almost useless. So the same smart meter that was on a poorly low bandwidth Wi-Fi system today can actually have a much faster throughput in the new architected system. So I think technology is catching up. The question is, where do you draw the line? Where do you get your business case? And then from the business case, how do I extract value to be able to return it back to the shareholder? And that is the biggest risk that utilities do not know. They are used to a 40-year payback, and they don't know how to architect the 6-year payback.
Yes, yes, there are still a lot of unknowns, and they're trying to figure out, how to respond to those challenges. But if we talk about we talked about the technological changes that are happening, but at the same time, in parallel, we are also seeing these distributed energy resources such as solar and wind that are challenging the, emerging smart grid, because now there are more producers, and anybody can produce electricity. If you just have the solar panels on your rooftop. So how is that, how are nations defining how to respond to those kind of distributed energy resources production challenges that are coming their way?
Correct. So yesterday there was a talk when I was giving a lecture to the ASEAN utilities, 11 utilities of the Asia Pacific. I was on a Skype call giving this talk. So you're absolutely right. Distributed energy is going to be the way that will shape the wires business. It should be plug and play, but right now you have a distributed energy available, but to connect, I have to take your permission. And the question is, why do I need to take your permission when I'm connecting it inside my house? And that is the challenge. The consumer is saying, why do I have to stand in line and take people's permission? Because it's sitting right behind the meter, which is inside the house in a way. So that we have not figured out, because electricity in its complexity of, what we call power quality gets impeded. And there are a lot of these technical papers, including some that I've written, talks about it, because it is a system which your neighbor affects the other neighbor affects the other neighbor. So the question is, how do I de-link it? So when I talked about the boxes, which I told you can enable utility-based controls from your own house to be enabled, is the way to go. So it will automatically control itself as an autonomous unit as long as I don't violate a grid code. So which is the voltage, the frequency, whatever. So I should be able to do it. So if there are boxes that are certified, as we have today, they are certified. It takes a leap of faith to say, okay, let's try this in a neighborhood where all these autonomous boxes will hold the piece of wire to a power quality, and the utility doesn't need to get involved in the day-to-day, minute-to-minute transaction of people bringing in distributed resources, whether that be load, whether that be generation, or it can be electric vehicles, whatever they want to do. It is resilient enough to take all those changes. And we haven't got to that yet because it's a leap of faith. The grid code right now prevents you from giving total autonomy to all the consumers. And we need to work that through the regulatory system to say, how do we have faith? Have we tried enough? Have we done all these, pilots? And how does it work, right? And so it's a matter of time. It's coming, but it's a matter of time that the regulator will have to walk step by step. I sit on the European Regulators Association, where this is a big discussion, saying how will the regulator come along with me? Because the regulator is largely a lawyer, a legal expert, or he or she is a financial expert, or a member of the government. They are not generally sort of technical, simply because their job is not to be technical. The statutes of the regulatory system says you shall regulate to the lowest cost. And so they look for that aspect of it. So it will come. I think today enough of pieces exist in the marketplace to come. If you look at the town of Aalborg in Netherlands, you look at Jeju Island in Korea, they're all moving towards these autonomous communities where all these distributed resources is plug and play, and they can prove that the wires are not getting hampered the way we think they will get hampered. So it's a kind of a nightmare scenario, which we need to sort of bring it down to reality.
Sure, no, and you made some excellent points there. But I'm also thinking, these are probably more complex challenges, because if everybody is producing, electricity, we don't know how much load will come from where and what will be the nation's requirement of electricity. So how are nations going to make it intelligent to understand that, how much electricity needs to be produced? Because you cannot just depending on what form of electricity is produced, whether it's solar or whether it's a any other form of production. But how do we know how much to produce, and where would, if there is, let's say, extra overload of production, where would that electricity go? Do we have effective way to storing that electricity that would be produced, and the power that would not be needed in near future but may be needed down the road? So how are we technologically playing this? How are we making this more intelligent?
Complex, but hopefully the answer should be along. If you just take generation away today, just take the traditional one-way power flow. All utilities have got very good models in their control systems to correlate temperature, even in entertainment like Sunday football games, to tell you what the peak power will look like hour by hour by hour. And they track generation to those predictive peak loads, and they manage it to the minute, in fact, or to the second. So now we are adding a generation component that, of course, makes that very complex. But rules can be brought into play that says if I generate, I should be able to go to a certain limit. And after that, if I exceed the generation limit, I should be told you can't do certain things. So there are those generation limits that would have to come. But if I choose to produce, I may have an energy storage that I will just divert it to my garage where it'll be sitting there, and I can store power. So this issue is coming up again and again and again as to should there be limits or should there be no limits. I think there will always be limits, but I think we should raise those limits such that it doesn't go and practically impinge on the lifestyle choices of people. So it is an issue. Now, if you take the duck curve of California, the big one, you have a duck curve here. Duck curves are coming in other parts where solar PV, Australia has also got that. The question is, what do I do with the low-cost solar PV during the day? But we have not created incentives for people to say, okay, let me use that low-cost power during the day for doing something at a high-priced side after the sun has set. So it's like load shifting, if you will. So if you allow energy storage to come in, people will charge all that, in fact, and then they'll say at 8 o'clock, I'm not paying 34 cents. I'm not paying 28 cents. I'm paying 4 cents. So time of use in Ontario is like that. In the day, we pay around 14 cents. Night, we are about 6 or 7 cents. But the time of use arbitrage, if you see, is still not good enough for me to say, okay, I'll make my investment whole. So the utilities can play a part by saying, okay, you pay a monthly fee, and I will defease all the financial cost, and there will be a box that'll be there in your garage. It'll have once in a while a linkage with us. But by the way, you can save so much of money on your power bill because you will charge during the night and you will spend during the day. Or in California, you'll charge during the day and then expend it at night. That business model has not caught the utilities. They are in the regulated side of the business, and they don't want to enter the service part for fear that they don't know the risk. They are not used to that risk. Relatively speaking, we have always got our 8%, 9% rate of regulated return. Comfort life, why go into an area that we don't know much? So it's that kind of a paradigm.
Yes, no, I understand that, and that's a very complex challenge. Well, irrespective of whether there is a limit or limitless, production of electricity, as consumers become producers of energy, it's going to bring us very complex security challenges because the storage unit, I mean, that itself brings a lot of complex security challenges because we don't know what kind of security risk emerging and how to manage those security risks. And not only that, there is a whole emerging disruption in this energy economics because of all these different variables. So it will be interesting to see how nations go forward on that. But how do you think nations should go forward using energy more efficiently? I mean, you gave a really good background on on that, but how to put these renewables and smart technology at the heart of our energy system to bring not only the sustainability but also security to our energy system.
Correct. So the legacy pieces where you have people who have built it over 100 years, they're finding it more challenging. Actually, on developing economy, they're finding it as an opportunity because they don't have anything to begin with, so you architect it the way you want. So the question in this is, there are some core pieces. So as you interconnect more, cyber physical security becomes prime. Because the more you connect, it's like an internet, right? The more I talk to somebody, I have a cybersecurity issue. So that's number one. Number two, if you look at the multiples of lifestyle to economic development to cost of power, when I was a younger man, it used to be about 10 times the cost of power. I've done these analysis. Today, it is anywhere from 40 to 45 times the cost of power. So it's not the power disruption, it is the impact of the power disruption that people have to value. And we see that again and again, especially in urban cities, where being without power in a high rise means no water, no elevator, no nothing. So it becomes an issue. So if you take that forward and say, okay, how will I get this going? The notion that I have cyber physical security at the core of all these developments is a mindset that has still not come. The utilities are very well aware, but the customer and what I call the last edge of the mile on the grid, product developers, have to sort of agree that this has got to be a core part of their design, as opposed to just selling what they feel like. And part of the challenge is there. So there's a lab at NREL in Colorado, which we use in North America, and that does all the simulation on a vendor by vendor product. And so we have come to have these laboratories that says, I can take vendor A, and without giving it out in the open domain, I can say it's good, bad, or ugly, whether you're a Class A product or a Class C product. But even with that effort, we have so many products coming online that the risk of connecting what I call a non-certified product is very high. So as you go to a distributed architecture, I go to a store, I buy a store, I see a particular label. I don't know what that label means. I'm assuming it's all there. I connect it, and then, I have a problem. Like a garage door opener. A garage door opener, the classic is, do you ever read the label? We never. We just go buy. And it works. And in a way, the garage door opener could satisfy us today. Who knows from a cyber physical system, whether it is weak or strong? We don't know. We don't know. We just go and buy it, right? And so the same thing is happening with inverters. The same thing is happening with Wi-Fi boxes. The same thing is happening with routers. So the whole notion of firewall, this, that, needs now to be built in so that the consumers don't have to be worried. Plug and play, and it should automatically come up. So it's happening. On the transmission side too, NERC SIP, you may have heard, is one such standard. It has evolved so much from the legacy system to where NERC SIP is today. And it's a standard that all the major utilities in North America, we conform to that standard to be able to interconnect with each other on the transmission line. So it's coming. These are all there. But on the last mile, closer to the home, it is a little bit of a Wild West right now.
Sure, and it's understandable because there's an emerging, technological development that's happening. We are still trying to figure out where the vulnerability lies, and where are the complex challenges. And especially if you look at energy industry, it's not only just the smart meters, but also the smart appliances that makes the threat platform much more complex and much more bigger. It's not just few endpoints that we have to look at now. It's many different endpoints where there are security vulnerabilities. So we'll have to figure out also authentication, real time authentication that would help us bring security. And this just like energy industry going through changes, the smart grid, we are also facing similar challenges with the financial industry as nations try to go towards cryptocurrency, and people try to put all their savings or money into cryptocurrency, where we still are trying to struggle with bringing the cyber security to or computer security to each and every person, or even the very literate. So this security, especially the cyber security, is a big complex challenge. And as the efforts to modernize grid intensifies, the very technologies that is giving us the ability to modernize the grid and make it smart and make it intelligent and make two-way communication and give us all these extra amazing features to move the grid forward. They have this, it's giving us simultaneously big openings on these grid assets that were so very securely closed so far to both external and internal intruder access. So security is a big complex challenge, and where and how should we focusing on, and what areas should we be focusing on, especially for the security? It's we are not looking at just the, I mean, as we diversify and decentralize this energy grid, one way it's that, we are trying to minimize the broader impact of the terrorist attack, or shutting down of the power grid. So, and at the same time, we are also bringing very focused security risks to each and every individual and each and every component of a nation, for which I don't see them that they are prepared for.
So two answers. I think you just brought that subject up in take appliances. 8, 10 years ago, we actually had many rounds of appliance manufacturers producing intelligent appliances that could talk to one another inside the house. How many of them are selling today? Very few. The reason is they have not been able to come to a common understanding of a common platform with a common set of standards that allows product A to talk to product B to talk to product C. It just hasn't evolved. So today we do not have smart appliances communicating to each other inside a house, but we have smart appliances that does what it does. The washing machine, the dryer, etc. So that's number one. Number two, so you can imagine if large players have not been able to come together on a thing like this, now your question, the other question you just posed, is like 100 million times bigger. And so the question is, where do we go from there? Number two, cybersecurity will always be an ongoing enhancement that will be required. It is not like I've built a big jailhouse and I've got all these security guards there and then nothing will happen later on, built like a bricks and mortar fortress. As you enable more and more and more, cybersecurity or different threats will also crop up, which somebody has to think about what to do. So if you take the transportation sector today, we were able to get an e-boarding card. And now we don't even need a boarding card in some of the airports right now, where your iris scan is the boarding card. So they've done away with. So today, if I go to Dubai, I don't have a boarding card. I just walk, give my iris scan, and I walk inside the country. So it's a freedom that I get. I cross the border in maybe 5 seconds. But it's something that somebody has to think about. What does this security mean in terms of the internet and other things that are connected? So that's number two. The third thing is the ability to recover. So when you talked of complex systems, and we also in our IT systems and the utility have done lots of work in the last 7 to 10 years. The question is not that we will go down. There is a probability we will be attacked. The question is how quickly do we recover and how quickly do we isolate, which was not the theory 20 years ago. The 20 years ago theory was build a fortress around it so that nobody can enter. Today we have said, no, we have to let it open because there are people who use the data for a whole bunch of good reasons, but we need to watch out. So the financial industry is sort of guiding. Would you believe in the cybersecurity workshops that we have done in the last maybe 2 years? We have always invited financial services and transport services, the air transport services guys. How do you manage, large airports with all these kinds of things? And a lot of these learnings that were done 4 or 5 years ago, which are real time, is now entering the power sector. It wasn't thought through, and now it's coming into the power sector. But to answer your question, cyber threat will always occur with a lower probability, hopefully. But the ability to catch it, to recover, and to rectify is where the utility needs to understand to be able to recover, let's say, in 3 minutes. Will it recover in 3 minutes? It probably will not in the old system. It could take maybe a day, right? And so you don't want, those kinds of issues.
Yes, absolutely. That is at the heart of it, the quick recovery, and we have to talk about resiliency. And I mean, cybersecurity. I completely understand. There is still a long way to go before we'll be able to bring the effective cybersecurity to each and every component of a nation, or in each and every systems of a nation. But by the very nature, electric grid is dispersed and includes, potentially soft targets, and like you said, we have to keep it open, so that's these more easily identifiable targets, due to its visible presence in communities across nations. That is not something we can change. It is moving forward, but due to this visibility and its extensive network, the grid is vulnerable. However, the design of the grid is probably what makes it quite resilient. So do you think that the design of the grid is bringing resiliency or will bring resiliency as we focus more on how to bring security at the design phase of the grid?
Yes, it is already happening. Resiliency is already today a part of the architecture. The question, I think, is do we gold plate everything right from a $100,000 piece of equipment to a $50 piece of equipment with the same standard? The old mode of thinking was I can have one standard, and then what happens is all these new things that we talked about will not be enabled in the marketplace because every box you touch in the marketplace will be like $10,000. So the question is, how do I have a category which will not be allowed to go to the next higher level to do a bigger damage? So let me take an example of a house. We now have a wireless from a garage door opener is wireless. Somebody can hack into it, but he or she should only be able to open or close the garage door. You should not be allowed to get into the electric power system from the garage. And so the box that actually takes it into the house, into the electric power meter panel, should not be, it should be unhackable. It probably would have a much higher cybersecurity level. So we are architecting that, in fact, to say, okay, what is the requisite level of cybersecurity, knowing fully well that there will be attacks. So if I don't lose a whole community of 3,000 people, but I may lose a house because somebody hacked through my garage door opener or through a wireless communication, it may occur. But what I have to say is, I will not let the community come down, which is what the true architects of hackers would like to do. That like they did in parts of Eastern Europe, where they took out a country for about 3 days. And you don't want that. But so the question is, there is always a risk. It'll always evolve, and there's always a recovery. And I think it's a continuous process, as with internet hackers. I mean, it never stops. And I don't think it'll ever stop.
No, that's fair. I absolutely agree to that. I mean, the security risk will always remain, but we have to figure out how to quickly, come out of that and how to make our systems resilient. So, how should nations approach not only security risk but security resilience of their energy generation, this transmission, distribution, and delivery systems, and which new security or resilience protection methods and technologies do you think are still needed to accommodate bringing this smart grid resiliency requirements?
I think at the bulk power level, you take the centralized generators, you take the large bulk power transmitters, it's more physical than cyber because it's a block system. Nobody can enter into that system. It remains within the utility. Generally, you'll not be able to ever get in on the telecom or on the IT side of it. But as you come down to distributed energy resources, which chips away at the centralized large generation, like Denmark, for example, you will find that by not having centralized generation, I actually have better security. The fact that you can't put 3,000 things down, whereas I can take one power plant off with one incident, is itself an increased security. But I have an issue that they're also distributed, that I need to ensure that its level of security is different from that of protecting, let's say, a nuclear power plant or a thermal power plant, a big thermal power plant. So it's happening. So I think on the transmission, what I call the bulk electric side, it's always been secure. Nobody gets in, nobody gets out. It's only known to the people who need to know, right from the operator to everybody. It's on the distribution side, as we get to distributed energy resources, the ability for people to plug and play, the ability for retail markets. We talked of, blockchain, as another way. All that is to enable this freedom of the market. And if we open it up, then only we can enable the freedom of the market. But at the same time, we need to ensure that, people don't come and hack. So it is a two-way street. On one side, technologies are ready, banging at our door saying, I have rooftop PV, I've got wind, I've got biomass, I have whole energy storage all coming, but you're not letting me in. And so we have to open it up so that the whole retail sector is, I think, way to completely requires a new architecture. And that is what currently the thinking is. So if you then go the way of Denmark, for every country, let's say, every house is a producer. Every house is a consumer. I then decide what I will sell, what I will produce, what time I produce, what do I do. I have that, in fact, today in my house. I can architect it for a 10 kilowatt system right here today. And there are papers that say, you know what is the level of energy storage I need? I can put 7 kilowatts of rooftop PV in my house, even at a northern latitude like Toronto, where the sun isn't very good in the winter. And I can still make a reasonable living. Now, will I need the grid or not need the grid? I probably, being in a colder climate, will always need the grid because I don't want to go down in the middle of winter and I have an issue. But if I'm in a milder climate, which with the Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn, I probably would say, you know what, worst comes to worst, if the power is not there for certain periods of time, I may not be able to run the air conditioner, but I will live. And so the probabilistic view, this is what I was telling the ASEAN countries, as you go to more and more renewables, 100% renewable world, if you will, you'll move from a deterministic Western culture to a probabilistic type of society. And if you don't have that, you can't have controls. You can never control a probabilistic thing to a deterministic world. And that's where we're struggling in the Western world. With more wind and solar, we just want everything by the second the way we had it. But we can't get it that way. So there is a probabilistic type of approach. You will be down for some time. But if you got resilience, you got microgrid, you got storage, that is your fallback. That's your fallback.
But at the same time, see, control is one thing, but when each individual is a player here, I mean, we are also talking about complex resilience risk because and accountability, because energy infrastructure provides fuel and electricity to each and every nation, and in turn depends on all these, transportation and information technology, communications, finance, and the government infrastructure to function all collectively, individually, and collectively to work cohesively. So, to ensure a resilient nation, it's much more different. There's a lot more that needs to be done, specifically about who is ensuring that the whole system is being made resilience against interruptions. I mean, when we are talking about anybody can produce electricity, which is great, but now there are two components, hardware and software involved. Now, who is responsible for, if we talk about cybersecurity breaches, who is responsible for making sure that they have made their hardware and software resilient, that they have taken all the steps to make sure that they have anti-malware software, they have antivirus, so all those things, everything that needs to be done, they have have effective password protection, and all those parameters they have taken care of. But if we depend on individuals for the security of the grid, a portion of a grid, even not the whole grid, portion of a grid, then we are opening up to so many vulnerabilities, because we cannot depend on individuals accountability, in a very interconnected, interdependent, integrated systems that we are developing. We have to have a different approach to make manufacturers more responsible, so make the hardware in a way that they are automatically, just we get updates on Windows and all that they are automatically getting updates on the security, so we don't have to depend on individuals action and decision, that they have taken all the necessary steps to bring the updates, to effectively do all the updates that are necessary. So these kind of complex challenges, I think that each nation need to work on, because at this point I don't see that happening, that the manufacturers or software developers are taking the lead and they are being accountable, and they are bringing the accountability to each and every action and decision on the software updates. We don't see that. We are depending on the individuals action and decision, and that's where I see bigger security and resilience challenges emerging.
Correct. But I think a lot of good things happening. There's a push and pull. The vendors today are actually 5 years ahead of where their products are, and they want us to come there. We are scared to come there because we don't know what it means to come to the point at which they're talking. So it's happening. If you look at all the home gadgets that you have today, it's all being reasonably managed through software updates, whether that be a software provider, that be a telecom provider, whether that's your broadband provider. They're constantly sending updates and they're managing it for you. Now, the only layer on the power side will be the updates provided by the utilities. But for all practical purposes, if I have a 3 kilowatt inverter in my house, smart inverter, it's reasonably will be taken care of by software upgrades. Why? Because the codes and standards of the nation, if you take the IEEE standard, you take the IEC standard, they're evolving by the year. In my own career in the last 8 years, if you look at the amount of revisions that have taken place in this, by raising the bar with every use case, it's a constant evolution. So the question is, these patchworks are constantly being sent. The notion today is, of course, that power is non-interruptible to me, so to speak, and I don't want it ever to be interruptible. So what is the utility doing as a layer higher than that to manage all this? It's a question mark, and I'm not saying the utility is ready, but I think the boxes that are coming into play are to the standards that we are actually enacting in this country. So it's not that. If you look at some of the technology developments that we have done, it is being certified by IEEE, by IEC to the code. Now, if IEC stops progressing in its codifications for future revisions, I have a problem. But remember this, after 7, 8 years, most of the payback that I ever got has already been achieved. So in the electronics business, to say it's 40 years is not likely to happen. It'll be like a version change up to a point, and after that, it'll be a model change. And when a model change comes today, if I look at my router in my house, I've already got 10 routers over the last 10 years. Every 2 years, Bell gives it to me for free and says, this is the latest one, just come and swap it. Right? In their business model, they've already recovered the cost, or maybe they give it to somebody else. I don't know what they do, but it's recoverable. The utilities have not gone into that level because they don't understand the business model. They have a regulatory type of business model, but not a free market business model. The Europeans have got it. If you look at the market operators of Europeans, they are playing very well, in fact, in aggregation, in distributed resource management. The utility is not even known to the customer. It's only in North America that, we only go with what the utility says for brand recognition. In Europe, actually, they don't even know E.ON, which is the wires provider. They only know the market provider to whom they subscribe for energy. So it's a big change between the two. And I don't know what will take to bring that kind of a retail market opening here. But in parts of North America, retail market has not taken place. As in Canada, we don't have a retail market except in hot water heaters. The only true retail player is the hot water heater. Even in the gas side, we don't. So we have to see that. And to me, that is the last sort of leap of faith as to how do we consume these energy appropriately across multiple fuels. I mean, we haven't talked of smart energy, but we work on smart energy. So we have an air conditioner that works on gas and also electricity. So in the winter, gas is expensive. So I should be able to get, during the fall season on electricity. In the summer, gas is cheap. I'm not heating the house. So I should be able to use that fuel for an objective. So fuel cells will be one. The capstone turbine may be another. So we have not brought fuel arbitrage inside the house. We have a gas pipeline to do certain things. We have an electricity wire to do certain things. We have a water line to do certain things. We have not cross-compounded it inside the house. So smart energy would hopefully allow for even more, in fact, innovations to be able to take a cheaper fuel, which may be gas, to be bringing it to electricity and vice versa. So it's an interesting subject as we move along.
Absolutely, it is very interesting subject. So, what are your concluding thoughts on smart grid to smart energy, and what would you like to tell those young, curious minds across nations who wants to get involved in solving their nation's complex challenges, especially and energy is the backbone of the economic growth across nations. So, where should these young mind put their efforts into bringing that economic prosperity, the foundation of the economic prosperity that they so very much need, for their nation to build on and, then advance other industries? What would you like to tell them?
I think this is the best time. They've already started doing it 15 years ago. All the plug and play devices, all the apps, all the various software written, if you go to Redmond, Washington, and other places, are all being driven by youngsters. The entire transformation of Uberization, Airbnb is all youngsters thinking along this. They need to enter into this space. And thankfully, hardware today is only 10%. Software is 90%. So they have a big, big advantage where my grandson today knows how to operate the iPad without I having to teach him. How did he learn at the age of 3? I don't know, but he knows. He played around with it. There's only one button. I don't know what he does, but he can watch his own things. So I think you are going to see The youngsters lead us into the future. All we need to do is to put this big sort of viewing glasses and say, where can they go wrong, and then correct that through policy, through regulation, through certain architecture. So the architecture may still remain. But the essentials, I'll tell you, it's the world for youngsters and not for the aged. It's, in fact, my concluding thoughts.
Well, we want them to be in the driving seat because they are building the tomorrow and they are the tomorrow. So, having said that, thank you so much, Ravi, for participating in Risk Roundup today. We appreciate your thoughtful insight on smart grid to smart energy, and our global viewers and listeners would benefit tremendously from the information you provided on the evolution of power grid and the smart energy and the need for solving complex challenges and making the grid resilient. So even if a single individual can understand the complex challenges facing grids today and in the will face in the coming tomorrow and innovate based on the discussion we had today, this risk roundup dialogue has been of service, and we thank you for that.
Thank you. And like Ted Rogers in Canada said, the best is yet to come.
Absolutely. The best is yet to come. And having said that, Risk Roundup, a global initiative launched by Risk Group, is a security risk reporting for risk emerging from existing and emerging technologies, technology convergence and transformation happening across cyberspace, geospace, and space. We at Risk Group believe that risk management, security, and peace, they walk together hand in hand. Though security is related to management of threats and peace to the management of conflict, risk management is related to management of security vulnerabilities as well as management of conflict. And it is not possible to conceive any one of the three without the existence of the other two. All three concepts feed into each other. We believe that the security we build for ourselves is precarious and uncertain until it is secure for everyone across nations. Tradition becomes our security. So, if we build a culture of managing risk effectively, it will lead us to security, and security will lead us to peace. Let's manage the existing and emerging risks together. For more information on the risk roundups, to watch the risk roundup webcast or hear the risk roundup podcast, please go to riskgroupllc.com and do not forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, I'm Jayashree, host of Risk Roundup, signing off. See you next time. Thank you.